I'd now like to invite our hosts, Aslak, Myhre, and Mike Keller, to join me on the stage for a conversation. We put out a call for some questions from all of you, and we received some. So I think I'll begin with a few questions that I had gathered, and then we'll move on to include some questions that came through in our survey today.
This?
Would you like some water? Yeah.
A little bourbon wouldn't be bad.
Oh, yeah.
And some
Did
fruit.
I say that?
Okay, so I get to use the mic.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So I want to start with something, Mike, you quoted this morning an article about how AI is changing organizational boundaries. This idea of needing to work hand in hand with domain experts driving the needs. But at both Stanford Libraries and the National Library of Norway, the technology group, like the engineers for the most part, are organizationally separate from collection development, archivists, metadata librarians. So how do you see this kind of organizational structure that needs to happen changing in the future?
So the truth is that article is a modern representation of a principle I've had for a very long time. Yes, we organize ourselves in various functional groups for various reasons, but we shouldn't depend upon those structures being too rigid. In fact, we need to be quite flexible. And indeed, we are quite flexible. The point, though, is not to have two different structures operating at once. One is some kind of sort of a functional organization, perhaps, so departments of collection development and departments of IT people and departments of metadata people and acquisitions departments, so on, so on, so on. What we need to have is that because it's convenient for some reasons or something like it. But as well, we need to be very flexible in putting work groups together that have projects or programs to work on together, but they should come together, do that work, produce something, produce some easy-to-use programs, projects, guides, whatever, and then take a relaxed view of what they've done and move on to the next project, so that the boundaries have been blurred for a very long time here. It's worked out very, very well. So I thought that statement was a sort of a modern reflection, a current reflection of what we've been up to for some 25 years or so.
But you have a geographic kind of challenge, do you not?
Not necessarily, because I think it's a really good question. And I think, as always, we need to look at history to understand where we are. For the National Library of Norway, we have a digital department, and we have a department for cataloging and preservation, where all our materials are. And we catalog one place, and then we have digital. The reason for this is basically that when we started doing digital was something new on the outside of an oral production, and it was an appendice. And then it became more and more important. Today, digital is of course enormous amounts of things. It's production, it's digitalization, it's development, it's running of systems, and all so on. But just recently, in 2016, we were given a new law, because we're a national library, and we differ a bit from university libraries on our task. And as a national library, the Legal Deposit Act is what runs us. And 2016, the new Legal Deposit Act of Norway says that we will have digital first, which means that we'll no longer digitize contemporary material. Even though it's an analog book, we will have the right to collect the digital production file. In the same manner as we'll have for the produce. I think for our part, we will use this as an opportunity to look at our organization as you're pointing at, because we need for the National Library to organize for what we do and for our tasks, our assignments, our role, our job. And with this new law, I think it is time to see that we need to organize, for instance, around legal deposit. And legal deposit is no longer analog with a digital appendice. Legal deposit is digital and analog with digital first. And then we can't have the digital people in one room and the cataloging people in another room. So I think we will see for our institution the kind of change you are asking for in some roles in some aspects, but we're Norwegians, so I can't just do that. We need 2 years of discussion with the unions and with everybody before we come to a conclusion.
So I have a corollary to my principle, which is that admitting that my view of the world does not exist. I'm dependent upon 400 other people who do the actual work of the Stanford libraries to tell me what's up. But my principle, the other principle, the corollary to the principle I just spoke about with regard to the organization, is that any responsible figure in the Stanford libraries knows that he or she could go tap on someone else's shoulder, or 3 or 4 shoulders, or 6 or 8 shoulders, and ask them for assistance and get a group together going all by themselves. They don't need permission. They have a responsibility to get things done, and they could reach out and organize something for themselves to get something done.
Just to add one thing, which I also find interesting, because we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, so in my case, the people who have been at the National Library for the past 30 years. And I think one of the most interesting thing about coming to the National Library of Norway, who is fully digital, is that I have never experienced having a meeting about anything digital. Mm-hmm. We never talk about digital. The only times we talk about digital is when somebody from the outside asks us about the digital. Because digital is not something strange on the outside in this institution, it's a part of what we do. So as Mike says, every time we challenge something, every time we get a new assignment, every time something happens, digital is part of it. We don't have to put it on some kind of a pedestal and look at it. It's just the way we breathe.
But looking around the room, we're now singing to the choir.
Yeah, we are, aren't we?
Right? I mean,
This is why aren't they singing if they're the choir?
well, they should stand up and sing, absolutely.
So moving beyond the digital then, you told us, Aslak, this morning that libraries are no longer gatekeepers but gate openers, right? And that we are agents. And then when Joanna Bryson kind of added some sort of nuance to this notion of the agent, of making this distinction between moral agents being considered responsible for their action by society. So how does the responsibility of libraries change as they become gate openers because of AI, in result?
First of all, I think it gives opportunity more than anything. And I think it's important then when we talk about AI, if I can say something about that in libraries, my experience is that we have a tendency to enjoy talking about it. We enjoy meeting each other, talking about it, whatever it is. The cataloging rules, for instance. Hundreds of years of cataloging rules discussions, or AI, or the digital, or outreach, and we find the problems. What could happen if we did this? Well, that could happen, and then we enjoy talking about that. But nothing really happens. Mm-hmm. So I think for our part, I think it's extremely important to see that what AI gives the library is not problems. It's not ethical questions. It's not moral responsibility. What AI gives the library is opportunity. That's the foremost. And what is that opportunity? It is to do what you've done with books or music or film analogly. You can actually take this wall of information and modify it in ways that makes people able to access it, but also want to access it. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this conference, that we have now more than last year seen examples from all over, at least the US and Europe, of these kinds of modifications where collections get accessible. So we need to have that first. And then when we have done that, or we are in the process of doing that, so we know it will happen, let's then talk about the morals and the ethics and all the other stuff, but let's not do things because it's more fun to talk about the problems than actually doing it.
Well, you were both very much doers and about moving into the future.
Wait a minute. I didn't get my 2 cents in here.
Oh, you want to respond to that? No, please.
I need to move away.
Please.
So what I liked about your introduction, which I found absolutely wonderful, by the way, and I think you should publish it, and we can distribute it using artificial distribution.
Yes.
what I liked was this notion that AI would allow us to transform many operations that will, in effect, by the development of a rule set that the artificial intelligence machines would make use of, a rule set devised by the folks who are in the business aspects of our work. I'm thinking of acquisitions and metadata and some aspects of digital preservation, is to make possible the release of a bunch of staff who are doing very good work on rule sets that require them to make decisions, transform them into other sorts of specialists. They'll be ready to do that, they are ready to do that, in favor of what we might call an automated artificial intelligence approach to the business functions of what we do, including perhaps self-extracting information, not just metadata, but information in general, concepts in general, from new materials coming into the library so it's more easily discovered, but without the tedium and the constant referral to these stupid, huge bibliographic databases here and there, to make more information more accessible, more knowledge more accessible, more malleable even, because we have these tools. And I believe we can build those tools. I think we are getting somewhere. Phil, do you agree with me? There's my man. And Nancy, what do you say? There you go. So there are two very important voices in my world that tell me this.
So here's a question that we received from someone in the audience. What concrete steps can collection holding organizations take to promote actions in the machine learning AI space which help them deliver their missions?
Hoo-ha.
That's
Get a lot of money, first of all, and then hire some specialists, hire some people that really are hip. I think, Peter, your presentation is a good start. Many of the other presentations we saw today showed the paths forward. There's not a single path, but there are many. And I like the idea of a kind of grid, or not a grid so much as a sort of wandering through paths in the forest to get these things together. But part of the problem here, of course, is that this is a small group of enthusiasts, interested parties, developers. This may be everything. This may be practically everyone in the business of making use of AI for libraries, or say 50% worldwide. We need a lot more folks in the game. And as have so many of you done in these presentations you've made, you're showing us there are tools out there that we can harvest and put to work in our own place. So that's the big way forward. It doesn't take a huge staff, although some of us have to have a huge staff in order for that to happen. We're enthusiastic about that.
Can I follow up on this and in Peter's presentation, since it's very fresh in our minds? One of the questions that I had following on Kyle's presentation too was, is there a role for weird intelligence as an interface to library collections, right? So, these different ways of seeing and reinterpreting content, organizing collections by semantic fields, as Peter said, rather than explicitly classifying content. Do you see that in the future, in the fantastic future?
Clearly, and I think for the first question, I think, of course, the first you need is digital content. If you don't have digital content, there's nothing you can do except working metadata posts, and that's just fun for a short while. So you need digital content. And when you have digital content, you can do a lot of stuff. But I think for the practical advice first, I think one of the things that's most difficult to do when you're going to start, for instance, an AI effort is to decide what you're not going to do anymore. And at least for us, who's a publicly funded institution, even though we have oil rigs, we cannot always expect to have something added. And the success for 20 years in our digitization strategy has been that we have stopped doing things. We haven't added on all the time and said, give us more money, let's do something digital also. We have stopped with a lot of things, freed workforces, as Mike's saying, and funds, and started. So you need to know what you're not going to do if you're going to do something new. And then to start experimenting isn't that difficult. but getting into production is, as Svein Arne said, extremely difficult. We have the aim for 2020, or I hope we have, that we're going to get into production on 3 different templates. One for pictures, one for extracting content from articles, and one for the service. And going to the service, the user interface, I think that's where you have the possibility for weird intelligence, because we are so used to that every metadata has to have something to do with a catalog, and the catalog is holy, and changing the catalog needs 5 popes, 7 cardinals, and 20 years of discussion. So nothing happens if you're working with the catalog. But it's easily, and we are aiming for that now in Norway, to create 2 layers of metadata. You can keep a holy catalog if you like, and you put that in the bottom, and it's an unchangeable entity, which we for the National Library guarantee for. But when a user is meeting a digital collection, she doesn't necessarily need to use the metadata in this catalog. She might not be interested. Kyle's metadata might be much better, much more interesting, or whoever's. And I think one of the things we can do, if we are able to create this layer and have digital collection, is let anybody actually create groupings in our collections, connections, similarities. AI can, people using AI can, and somehow I think we will see that the tools of navigation of digital collections will be very, very different from what we have today. And the cataloging idea of replacing a cataloging card with a mark stander and then creating a bib frame that is a bit less a cataloging card but still pretending that we are a physical library, I think we will see that there will be much other ways of navigating our collections without taking away the metadata in the catalog, but creating a navigation tool on the top of the collection that isn't as sacred as the catalog.
So I think that's right.
Was that the choir singing?
Evidently. I think that's right, but I think there's also this, I have this other linkage of ideas that go back to ancient libraries, where books were arrayed on shelves in part by the order in which they arrived, or by their size, in some cases by the color of their bindings, and often in the case of archives, by information that's been derived by others who came before and wrote about whatever the particular archive was that they were working on, that make it possible for you, through a kind of serendipitous process, discover what might be interesting. So I think we have to not only allow for but encourage serendipity, which would be to suggest that the sort of relationships that we are understanding could be possible through the linked data approach should be inherently part of the whole scheme, because there's so many parameters of an idea, so many parameters of an information object, so many parameters of a collection of texts, or collection of texts and images, or texts and images and sounds, or texts and images and sounds and 3D objects, and you just go through that, and you need to have lots and lots of parameters. How many, Peter? 2,400 and...
Yeah, 2048.
There you go, 2048, big number. But that would suggest that we need to be able to marshal that, but also to imagine what questions might be put, or what possibilities might arise from having all of those that would enable a new method for discovering something that was relevant. Or discovering something that wasn't relevant but was a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, there is something to wandering and discovering, and then picking up an idea, an image, something that you can then wail on. Improvisation is working against a known set in interesting ways that present new ideas. And I think that serendipitous, improvisatory aspect of what we could do should be part of our thinking too. I don't want it to be too structured, so we're only in 25 or 600 categories. 2048 is a good start. It's not the end. More to come. And particularly because I see the convergence eventually of libraries, archives, and I'm looking at my friend Paula over there, we've been talking about this. And where's Elena? The lady from the Roma Tre who spoke about, there she is, we need to talk. As we see this convergence of museums, small and large, archives and libraries, we need to connect all these carriers of knowledge, these representations of the human experience or not, so we can discover in a better and different way. Sometimes I want to see all the Van Goghs that have trees and flowers, but not humans. How do you do that? But we can. I think we can.
Were you going to?
Yeah, I really agree with you, Mike, and it's really interesting because, first of all, I agree serendipity is what we need to aim for, because serendipity is what we haven't been able to replace. We haven't created online serendipity the way it is in a library, private or public, wherever you go around. It's not. We haven't created serendipity even on Wikipedia the way you used to have an encyclopedia, because you passed something totally irrelevant you never seen before and you started reading and you never came to the L where you were looking. This kind of discovery we are still aiming to create, but there's a big difference because we have not 1,000 articles or 10,000 objects. We have millions and millions and millions and billions. So it's even more difficult, because how do you even navigate such a thing? And people won't care about the difference between museums, archives, and a library. And I think that adds to my point, Nicole. I think also we need to make a change, not just how we think about cataloging and metadata, but also how we think about the library. And I think the public libraries have been in front in this. We are used to seeing librarians as servants, servants of, for instance, in university libraries, the researchers, the academics, the professors, for the public in public libraries, for somebody who has a question that we can help them. And it's the idea where you needed to know all the shelves and where the books were even be finding material. But we are more and more not just servants or helpers for people who want to use our collections and have precise answers. We are, as I said, agents and missionaries. We are openers of knowledge. We can, when we meet billions, as you say, of objects, how on earth should a researcher or the public be able to even ask the precise question? They have no idea what's there. We are creating tools not just to help, but to make people use. We will need to see ourselves moving from being behind the bench to be a spearhead of something.
Right.
But Aslak, you have to relax a little bit. Because a lot of what people do and want to do has to do with play. It has to do with just wandering and seeing what's interesting. When I go to a new city, I like to walk around. And I don't know where the hell I'm going or how I'm going to get back, but I like to see what's out there and examine the local culture and see how it fits in and what's interesting and are there crafts and what's the food all about and do they have a little wine for me and so forth. It's not a structured thing. Yes, we do have people that ask questions. As much, however, we have people who respond to stimuli that we provide to them. And some of that stimulus has to do with stuff that comes in, knowledge objects that come in, but a lot of it has to do with people just wandering around saying, okay, what's on the new bookshelf? Or in the case of a museum, what's new that the museum has gotten? Can I get at it? And in the case of archives, how do I find this and thus about such and such? Yes, that's a question. But if you have some sense of what's there and what's been collected over the years, decades, centuries, you have some different ways of playing with the information that's accessible and getting somewhere because you're able to play with it.
But about that, shouldn't we, hearing that Google has more or less artists in residence, shouldn't thinking about the playing part as a library of major size, shouldn't we experiment with having artists in residence working with the collections from a library side working digital to do that. We do that in some of the libraries in Norway now when it comes to events. We have authors and residents creating events, readings, that kind of stuff, working creatively from the outside.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think we need to have authorization to play, nor do we need authorization to engage in artistic thought and artistic work, even as crude as mine might be. I think it's fine to have those examples and to understand what's going on and what the possibilities are, but equally I think it's important for everyone to feel that they have that authorization. Some of the time we're at work, some of the time we have tasks to do, some of the time we have issues to deal with. But in the other parts of our lives, we have things that we do that are fun. We get together with friends, we have a drink, we make a dinner, we travel, we go to a shop that we've heard about, we read a book that someone said was really terrific. And I just read a review of some of Massey's work. He died, Bob Massey died, and I had some idea that he had written extensively on Imperial Russia, but now I have a huge reading list that I have to work through. I don't know how fast I can do it. But fascinating stuff. You just picked it up from reading an obituary of a man that I'd heard of, but I don't think I've read any of his pieces. Well, that's serendipity, and I don't need to read about the Romanovs, but why? It'll be great fun.
Yeah.
So I think.
Will you share the list? Will you share the list?
Well, yeah. Well, it's online now.
Let me just follow up on what you were saying, Aslak, about the opportunities that we have with this. A theme that has run through many of the presentations today, and Kenrick McDowell in Vanessa's panel really kind of put a finer point on this, that the technology, this technology in particular, is a kind of mirror on ourselves, right? And he was talking about examples that are sometimes less than inspiring, but of course there's a potential for this technology to reveal to us within libraries how much is hidden within our libraries and archives, right? Like in other words, what is you were talking about how important digitization is. Well, what is not digitized? And what are the blind spots for us in the library in terms of what we choose to digitize and what we choose to prioritize? It seems like these tools are giving us a completely new way to look and to see materials, to evaluate materials that could open up sort of new modes of analysis that are beneficial for us. Because I think following on what you were saying about, libraries and librarians think of themselves as a more in a role of serving, but now, perhaps need to step forward a bit more on the other side of the bench. And I certainly hear that. I hear that here in this university library from our faculty who say, it's overwhelming, there's too much material. If the library could perform a kind of role of that which we talk about in terms of machine learning as a sort of dimensionality reduction, right? Well, that means we in the library have to have the tools to do the kind of exploration that you're also describing, Mike, right? To make these things available to us, to allow us to see and evaluate these collections in new ways.
I think there's something else operating that I think the linked data approach illustrates this well, but there are other approaches. The Rangan-Nathan classification scheme, faceted classification, did the same thing, and that is that there are parameters to everything. There are facets, like facets on a gem or a piece of quartz crystal. And those facets provide access points to whatever is the content of whatever the cultural object is, or the knowledge object is, or the information object is. And we must somehow understand that there are those facets. We don't have to know precisely what they are, but we can think of the facets of our imagination and what we desire to know or learn about, and then take those facets as ways of approaching a collection or a volume or an article or a piece of art or a piece of architecture, and say, okay, what is it that I'm interested in looking at, and what are the related facets, and what might I find out there in the world that would help me get there? It's a different kind of discovery process, but actually our brains do that. Mm-hmm. And those who are in the business, the folks in this room, in libraries, archives, and I think in museums, not sure about the museums, have some sense of those parameters. And when someone confronts them with a question that requires some precision, or at least some thought, begin to put that understanding of these facets, these characteristics, these relationships to work, to find a way to find something that's useful, relevant, whatever. That's been my life. Mm. I had another comment. My first boss was a man named James Coover, who was a really good music bibliographer, and he was fond of saying, well, there may be library science, and it actually may be an art or a craft, but really, it's magic. It's magic. It's not simply science or an art or a craft. It has to do with connections that we make in our discourse, but also in our individual brains that lead us to knowledge, information, data that could be useful or could be fun or could be illustrative, something.
And both of you are seeing this technology as a way to kind of further advance that.
I think so, and I think when it becomes really interesting is when there is a discrepancy between how you as a librarian or as a human or as a specialist in linguistics or literature or musicology or wherever you are, read a collection and how the AI reads it. That's when it becomes interesting. Because if the AI just says the same as us, it's, yeah, okay, we can use the AI instead and I'm not needed anymore, but it's not any more interest in that. But if there's a discrepancy, it might be because the AI hasn't understood something, but it might also be because the AI has seen something that you haven't seen. And that's in a way the same as meeting a stranger who's read the same book as you, but she has read it in a totally different way and you like to discuss it. But the difference is, it's not about one book, it's about entire collections and how you see a library collection, or you see books, or you see maps, or you see connections. So it's in this, I think in this kind of discovery process, if we can come to the points where we disagree with the machine, that might be just as interesting or more interesting than the places where we agree with the machine.
So the reason we entered the Google Books project was that I felt it offered us the opportunity to get a bigger return on the university's long and large-scale investment in collections. The idea being that if we had all those texts digitized, and just back in 2003-04 when we were working on this to begin with, thinking of simple searching for keywords and key phrases, but from all the books in the collection, and that was the original proposition that I agreed, we would open up those texts in any language, in any character set, to discovery that is vastly beyond what was possible using the strictures of our Anglo-American catalog rules and similar. As it happens, by digitizing those texts, and they certainly didn't do the 9.5 million texts that we had on those shelves, they only did 3.5, we made possible more discovery on that simple search proposition, but we also opened up the possibility of doing more interesting things with those texts. And AI is certainly one of them, and I certainly hope that we're going to be able to do that with the 3.5 million, plus the licensing that we've done to bring in texts that we're licensing in the way of ebooks and so forth. That will be exciting.
So it's just one, because you're asking if this is, will it be expanding, useful, positive, and so on. I think it's also a question of it will be necessary, whatever we think about it. And just to take one example, we digitize and organize photo in the National Library of Norway. We are responsible for the Norwegian photographic heritage. 20 years ago, that was small collections. That was artist collection, particularly old collections, interesting collections of photos that were rare. And working with rare photo, you start the cataloging principle where you work a lot with each and every photo. And you also say a lot about the material of the photo, which technology was behind it, all these things. A lot of work on each photo. Now, photography as we knew it is dead. The 20th century was the century of the photography. We still take photos, but they're born digitally, they exist digitally, and they explode all over us, right? The photo archives of Norway, and I'm guessing all over the world, are closing down. The newspaper archives are closing down, the photo archives are closing down because there's no money in it anymore. So when the archivist or the librarian quits or gets a pension, nobody's hired. This means that these collections die, they fade out, they don't live forever, and they end up with us. Which means we are not facing small collections of thousands of photos. We are now facing, right now, about 75 million photos. That's the count now, and it's rising.
Not counting postcards.
No, the postcard is included in it.
Oh, good.
So these, and these are what we know of that we need to preserve, negatives and positives, diases, postcards, whatever exists, and we are going to preserve them and digitize them and make them available. That's at least the positives. That's our aim. We can't do that without AI. And I think we should also see there's two resources we can use. It's the AI, machine learning, and the other is the crowdsourcing. So, and we need to use both.
Yeah, so I think this is a brilliant example of a very large point that has been made several times today, and which I think we all more or less understand, and that is that really what we're talking about is huge data and a huge opportunity to learn from what we can examine and correlate in huge data, regardless of what that data is. And that's all about AI, and it's all about new possibilities. And whether it's for precision answers or for serendipitous discovery is the thing. And therefore, the people that understand that there is either big data, big text, big image collections all together, or understand there could be, and figure out how to make AI go to work, and have some sense of what would be interesting to discover, whether serendipitously or through some kind of a plan, the data scientists, the AI programmers, the big heads, the people that have demands that could be satisfied by this big data approach, which I believe should be increasingly multinational, ultimately I hope global. That's the big message. And I promise you that AI, what does that say? Oh!
There we go.
We're going to talk about that in just 5 seconds. That's the big message, and I promise you there will be discoveries that will improve the human condition just in basic medicine that will be transformative in amazing ways. And now for the announcement of our next organization. Tom has created, while we've been sitting here, a website. And he's going to show it to you. Aren't you going to show it to him?
It's on the internet,
Talk about
actually.
next year instead. People can go to the website.
Next year, we're going to be meeting in Europe somewhere about this time of year, maybe in a place that has snow and charm, not just drizzle and not too cold. And you can see where we've been, and you can see where we hope to be going. And more to follow. We have some other institutions who are joining this party. The Smithsonian Institution has, the British Library has, and we're now looking for more fellow travelers. Much as we have done in the IIIF context, we believe this is a new opportunity for a new bunch of fellow travelers to wander around, either doing precision work or doing serendipitous work.
And I think one of the important parts of this cooperation we're trying to create, it is we don't want to create a bureaucracy, we don't want to create an organization. This is a cooperation based on doing. So it's the sharing of what we do that's the point, and not the minutes and the meetings.
So listen, here's what I want to do now. I'm going to go in that next room and have something quaffable, perhaps something to eat.
I would love that.
Is Nicole going to allow us to do this?
I
Can we do that?
think it's time. I want to just take one moment, though, to thank everyone who was involved in the programming and planning. And in the back of the program, there's a kind of longer list. But I particularly want to call out Tom and Sven Arna and Claudia Engel, if she's still around somewhere. Claudia, thank you. And Quentin Vervard, where are you? Quentin, our intern, has been exceptional. And of course, Jib Kantanetsu has just been superb throughout this whole effort. So a big round of applause for all of them. And let's retire and have something quaffable.